Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to another episode of Living the Dream with Curveball, a podcast where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, I am joined by singer-songwriter Tom Tikka. Tom has been playing music since the age of 6. He's been in several bands, had several hit songs, and won several awards. So we're going to be talking to him about his career, how he got started, and what he's got coming up and currently working on. Tom, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, the pleasure's mine, man. Thanks for having me on the show.
Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
You know, it's like you already said, it's been a long run. Wouldn't even know where to start, but you're right. I sort of fell in love with music, or I remember falling in love with music when I was 6. And my parents were music lovers. And without lying, there was always something on. They were always listening to records. And one of their favorites was Paul Anka. Even though, I mean, that's sort of slightly old music even for my parents, but they really truly liked his stuff. And I remember my mom and dad, they had a bunch of his LPs, but they also albums. They also had a cassette. You know, you remember those days when people listened to cassettes, music cassettes, tapes in the car?
Absolutely. I remember, and the records.
All right. Yeah. And so, but you know, they had Paul Anka's 21 Golden Hits, or was it Golden Greats, or whatever the name was of the album. Anyway, a bunch of singles wrapped up together as they used to do in the 50s. And this was a store-bought cassette. I was very, because my mom and dad, usually they taped music and took that in the car. So we had these blank tapes, you know, went to the store, you got a blank tape, you went home and stuck the tape in the tape recorder and put an album on, and you could record music like that and take that to your car. And that's what my mom and dad usually did. But then this was a store-bought thing. It was very official. It had the case and everything and the artwork and stuff. And I was very much fascinated by it. And I remember my dad buying it and leaving it in the car, and it was on all the time. And this one day, my dad always took me with him when he went to wash the car or fix the car and whatever, you know, we went to get gas that day. And I remember him, because in those days you couldn't pay at the pump, but you filled up your car and you went inside to pay. And I didn't go with my dad. He went inside the gas station to pay for the gas. And I stayed in the car and he put the cassette on for me. And I remember this song called Lonely Boy came on, and was completely mesmerized by it. You know, it has Anka's double track lead vocals, and it's a very strong sound, and he double tracks himself perfectly. It's really, really well done. I remember being very impressed, even at the age of 6. I remember being very impressed by the Latin rhythm and the just incredible melody of the song when it goes into the chorus. And really from there it started. I went home. We went back home. I remember I asked my dad to give me the tape. So I, you know, took it up to my room. I had my parents' old Grundig tape player, and I played the heck out of that tape. I don't think my dad ever got it back, but I don't think he minded at all. But that was the start. You know, I fell in love with that tape and decided right there and then that I wanted to become a songwriter. And pretty soon afterwards, I started learning the basics of guitar and, you know, writing songs. I was very determined. I think at that point, nobody could have stopped me. My mom and dad sort of did, because I was playing so many hours a day that they never had really any peace and quiet. But, you know, they managed to live through it. I must have been awful at first. Some of the stuff I wrote was pretty, you know, bad. I remember the first song I ever wrote because I was 6. It was called the Coca-Cola song, and I still remember it. It's a hideous song, plagued by the memory of that. But that's how I got my start.
Well, what kind of music would you say that you consider yourself doing? What kind of singer are you?
That's a really difficult question, by the way, because a lot of the my influences, basically, those are the music that my parents used to listen to. And that's like the late 60s and 70s stuff. And back then, if you look at what was going on in music back then and you look at the charts, they were a lot more eclectic than they are now. And so pop rock would basically, that would be a rather wide concept, really. Seriously, it would be. On the one hand, you'd have Herman and Hermits doing Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter, which is really sappy. It's just straightforward 60s pop. And it's a song you could basically pour on your pancakes if that'd be possible. And then on the other hand, you'd have a lot of the, adventurous Beatles music in the late 60s, and then everything in between. But nowadays, when it came time, when the Impersonators signed my band, before I started recording solo albums for MTS Records, when the Impersonators got signed in 2017 and the label wanted to know what kind of music we're doing, what's your genre, what should we call this, we had tremendous difficulties. When we back in the day, it would have been called pop rock, but nowadays doesn't really exist as such. There's pop, which is synthesized and auto-tuned, and then there's rock, which is a lot heavier than what I'm doing, and very seldom these two genres mix. And for some reason or another, when I started investigating this, which is kind of silly, but I did because it's very, very important that, for example, when you submit your songs to competitions, that you submit them under the right genre. Because if you don't, then you got a bunch of pop lovers deciding your fate. And then if you put a song like, for example, that starts my new album called Bullet in the Head, you put it there, it's going to be basically disqualified. And so I took a little bit of time to get to the bottom of the genres a few years ago. And what I found, that where there used to be about 20 genres, there are now about 200. And there's, just even under punk, there are multiple different punk sub-genres, they're called. I just thought it's crazy. I think punk is punk, rock is rock, pop is pop. And I don't really feel like that you need to label your music down to, label it that accurately. But for some odd reason these days you do. And so I would, it's a very long answer, by the way, but if I had to label it, that's the backdrop. If I had to label the stuff that I'm doing, I'd probably call it retro flavored pop rock with a modern twist. Yeah.
You talked about the Impersonators, one of the bands that you were in. Tell us about some of the other bands you were in and what you guys did and why you disbanded.
Well, Carmen Gray was basically the first. I was always in bands. I suppose, I got my first recording contract when I was 16, and then first real one, I suppose, that actually materialized, where I ended up in the studio making a record when I was 21. And so, but those were all for small labels, and they really didn't, it just, nothing really came out of those. But Carmen Gray was my brother's band first, and then it became our band when he asked me to start writing songs with him for the group. And that was an incredible trip. We got signed by Sony BMG at first, and we recorded 2 albums for Sony, and then got dropped, and then got signed by Warner Brothers after we paid for the next single ourselves, or rather the Carmen Gray's manager paid. He took a huge risk and released it, and it became one of the biggest hits of all time in Scandinavia. And so all of a sudden we were back being loved, and people were shoving record deals down our throats. It was kind of, we could choose anything, and so we chose Warner, and then made another album, Gates of Loneliness, which is probably one of my favorite albums of my music. I think it was brilliant. I think we got exactly what we wanted in the studio, and I love that record still. I don't think it has a weak song on it, but everybody had been playing together more than a decade at that point, and so when it came time to go back to the studio to record a fourth album, it just we just weren't able to do it. We got an EP out of it, which I like a lot, and that EP had a lot of hits, 3 hits actually. It's got 5 songs, and 3 of them became radio hits. And we were always supposed to go and finish another EP, and we even recorded all that. That stuff is recorded, by the way. It's somewhere. Somebody has it. I don't know where it is, but there's 5 songs fully recorded. They're not mixed or mastered because nobody could be bothered. People were losing interest, and it was basically the end. And this was a difficult phase for me. Not only was Carmen Gray breaking up, but my first marriage was on the rocks, and we got divorced with my ex-wife round about that time. And so you can just imagine, within 6 months I had lost the band, my wife, and for a brief while my kids, and I didn't really have a direction or didn't know what to do next. So I went back to the university, and that's where I met Antti Audio, who is the other half of the Impersonators, and we kind of got together, and he was a music lover, I was a music lover. I remember we took this we were on this course because I was okay, so maybe go back a little bit. I was late registering because I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back to school, but that seemed to be the only option for me at that point. So I was late registering, and the only classes that I could take were not exactly the classes I wanted to take. And so there was this class. Antti had the same problem. He was late registering. And so we ended up in this class called Feminist Poetry, or that was the class. And we're the only guys there. And we became study buddies and figured out that, we're both music lovers. And I mean, neither one of us weren't really interested in doing the work for the course. We managed through it somehow. But we were talking about music, and he would be introducing me to groups like the Zombies. I mean, I knew of the Zombies, but he had a box set by them. I hadn't really explored the band to the extent that I should have, and I introduced him to the River Detectives, which is a slightly obscure British band, and really became fast friends. And then just maybe, and this is like, I want to say this was in 2012. I mean, 2013, at some point, out of the blue, Antti sends me a poem titled Ghost Town Radio. And I just, it came as a text message, and clicked it open, and there's this poem, and I read it, and I thought it was really, really, really cool. Very, very impressive rock poetry. And I just sent him a message back. It's like, is this yours? And he's like, yeah, it's mine. I said, this is great, And I wrote a melody to those lyrics, and that became the first song we ever wrote. And really, that was the start of the Impersonators, and that's how the Impersonators got started.
Well, you've won several awards and had several hit songs. Kind of tell us about those awards and the songs and how it felt to get those accolades.
Well, it always feels wonderful, especially the ISSA award that I won I want to say a couple of weeks ago, but this was in August, so a couple of months ago. Emerging International Male Artist of the Year. Whenever you win something, it's a wonderful feeling, because you've touched somebody with your music, and people appreciate what you're doing. It's the same thing with hit songs. I think that I'm gonna probably come across big-headed by saying that I never get tired of those, but let me explain the reason. The only thing that I've gotten very lucky in music, really truly lucky. And, you know, I've gotten discovered by the right people exactly at the right time. And people who've taken genuine interest in my music and have helped me along. But the only reason why I ever really wanted to become a songwriter, and this has always been the case, was that I've always just wanted to touch people with my art, my music. You know, whether I don't think that I ever specified it in my head, you know, whether the audience is small or big. I just always wanted to have an audience, a bunch of people who enjoy what I'm doing. You know, they're nodding their heads to my stuff, and really, you know, that's why I keep doing it. That's why I'm still involved, even after all these years. If I can bring happiness or, you know, moment of relaxation, or, you know, just give somebody an opportunity to take a break from reality for a little bit, you know, close their eyes, listen to my music, then if I can make that happen, or if somebody can make that happen, or rather if it happens, then I'm on cloud nine. And so from that perspective, winning awards and getting hit songs, it feels wonderful, because then it means that what you're doing not only transcends, but it touches folks.
Let's talk about your current and upcoming projects that you're working on that people need to know about.
Well, right now, oh man, I'm working on so many things right now simultaneously. I was just telling my wife this morning that I'm actually a bit stressed out. But I'm working on two albums. One is the Impersonators album, and I'm working on that with Antti Audio. And then and our producer, Janne Saksa. And then there's my solo record, which is the Tom Tikka and the Missing Hubcap's next album, which is basically also coming along now, and I'm working on that with Janne Saksa, and then both these projects have my label head Michael Stover as executive producer. And so basically the Impersonators record is more or less done. It's I've recorded everything for it. So now I'm in the process of sending Janne our files. He's gonna finish the mixes, and maybe we'll play a little bit of guitar here and there, or add something, but at this point it's just, you know, that record is ready to be polished up. It'll be titled Rainbows and Dead Flowers. And my solo album, which is going to be released later on next year, I'm working on the singles right now, and the first one's completely finished. It's going to come out 1st of December. It'll be called By 2022, sort of a New Year's track, really. And I quite like the lyrics. That, you know, if you look at them quickly, you think it's a love song, or, you know, broken-hearted love song. But if you look at it closely, if you really truly look at the lyrics closely, you realize that I'm singing it to the year 2022. And so I'm quite excited about that. We finished the music video for that today, actually, and I haven't checked, but the cover for that single's done as well. Everything's sort of almost ready for that, and then there's a couple of other things, I think in early February and April, then the third one, and then I'm hoping that the album's going to come out in late summer. But that's still sort of, that's a work in progress. The Impersonators album, depending on when that comes out, they're both going to come out next year, but depending on when we release the Impersonators album, the Hubcaps album is going to come out either in August or September, perhaps even October. We'll see. But those are the two projects that are upcoming, and there'll be singles starting December 1st this year. Three Hubcap singles by September, and 2 Impersonators singles.
So I guess I should have asked you this in the beginning, but where are you originally from?
I was born in Finland, but we moved to the States when I was 4. And then my life is, well, I mean, I've seen I want to say I've seen 70% of the planet, but in reality, probably 65. My life was between Finland and the US. When I was a kid, I lived in Ohio and later on in California. But we always, came to Finland for Christmases and summer vacations. And then I moved here about 15 years ago permanently. And, I've been back a couple of times. I've been back to the States a couple of times, and I'm now, because of Corona, I haven't had a chance, but I'm sure looking forward to, coming over there once again to check out well, it's funny to say the old country, because this actually is the old country where I'm now, but where I grew up.
Well, I usually do this to musicians when I have them on. Why don't you go ahead and give us a little a cappella or one of your favorite songs or a hit song or something so the listeners can kind of hear what it sounds like.
Oh, just sing it.
Absolutely.
Well, how about Rodeo? It's true, like a fool, I put my trust and faith in you. You were my first rodeo. There. That's Impersonators song that actually begins a cappella with that. So I have no idea what it sounded like, man, but
Oh no, it's good. It's good. Well, why don't you give us some final thoughts to go ahead and close it out? Give us all right, actually, before you do that, give us your contact information. How can people connect with you, get your music, any websites, any social media links so the listeners can connect with you?
I think that the best place to go to is www.tomtikka.com. If whatever's happening, you'll find there. And it's a great source of all the lyrics are there. Both Impersonators and my solo album digital booklets are there, and the music videos, everything. I think tomtikka.com is really the place to go. It's got, under one of the tabs, there's a separate page for the Impersonators. I think that's really where folks can find stuff the easiest. And in terms of the social media, I don't really have social media accounts for my solo project yet. I use the Impersonators, and I probably should label the pages the Impersonators / Tom Tikka and the Missing Hubcaps, but I haven't gotten around to it. I will at some point. I don't want two different accounts because it's updating even the existing ones in Twitter and Facebook and Instagram every once in a while. I think it's a lot of work, and I like social media. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not like a social media shark, if you know what I mean. That's not my scene in necessarily. But obviously, it's a great resource, and it's where people find you. And so if you look for the Impersonators Twitter pages, Facebook pages, and Instagram pages, then you'll find the stuff that I post on those accounts. But there are links on, if you go to tomtikka.com, then there are those small icons. You tap the Facebook icon, it'll take you to the right Facebook account and so forth. So going back to what I said about tomtikka.com, everything's there. It's the best resource. And obviously both the Impersonators and Tom Tikka and the Missing Hubcaps can be found on all streams. So it's out there.
Sounds good. Why don't you give us some final thoughts to close it out?
Well, I think that some final thoughts, the stuff that I've been, sadly I lost my dad a couple of years ago. And I've come to the conclusion that, final thoughts to anybody listening, I suppose, don't waste time. It all goes by so much faster than you'd ever think. It's crazy when I think about when I was younger, the situations I found mine in life and found myself in life, and just decided to live through stuff that wasn't making me happy. If there's just any, as a final thought, and just to everybody, if you're not happy, change your life, because in the end, really, as Thomas Jefferson points out, it's one of my favorite quotes. It's really not the years in your life that count. That's my final thought.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, TomTikka.com. Please be sure to follow, rate, review, share this episode to as many people as possible after listening. And Android listeners, go to the Google Play Store and download the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast app. Tom Tikka, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
For more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused on living the dream.